Okay, let's talk about the pelvis. Now, this is an incredible structure that looks pretty solid. However, it is perfectly designed to create space for your baby to pass through. So there is a lot that we can work with once we understand how this works, how it's perfectly designed, and how we can control the amount of space, allow more space to be created within the pelvis with things like movement and position. So firstly, we'll have a look at the actual structure. So this is the front of the pelvis and this is the pubis symphysis, and this is a joint, a cartilage joint that during pregnancy and birth, thanks to a hormone called relaxin, will soften and allow these two bones to actually move and open, which then creates more space here for the baby to pass through. So fantastic hormone that we have during pregnancy called relaxin, which is why it's really important when you are exercising or doing any yoga to be mindful, because your muscles and ligaments will be looser than pre-pregnancy. So then we have the sacrum at the back, and here we have the tailbone. Again, this part of the pelvis here is designed to move out of the way, so it will move backwards during childbirth, and that gives the baby up to 30% more space to descend through the opening. So although this looks like a really solid structure, and obviously it's part of the skeletal system, so we don't expect our bones to be able to move and open. However, this part of the anatomy is perfectly designed to do so. And it's also worth noting that the baby's head is also, the plates of the bones of the skull are movable and they will overlap each other. So as the baby comes down through the pelvis, those plates on top of their head, which is why the baby has that opening at the top of the skull, which we have to be really careful of in newborns, but the plates of the skull will actually overlap, and that will allow the baby's head to pass through the pelvis. So it can be quite daunting, especially for petite ladies, and especially if they've been told that they have a large baby. It can be quite daunting to think that they're never going to be able to birth them, but as you can see, everything moves, everything opens, and there's lots that we can do to allow that to happen rather than restrict it. Okay, so we know that the pelvis is designed to open, so how can we work with the pelvis during pregnancy and birth to allow that to happen and to give our babies more space to be born? Well, it's all down to movement, and when we move, our pelvis moves. So it's understanding that certain leg positions, where you put your knee, if you raise your knee above your ankles, all those kind of things will actually allow the pelvis to create more space for your baby. So during pregnancy, all the bones here will obviously be covered in lots of muscles and ligaments and fascia, and the muscles will run through, up, down, across, completely surrounding the pelvis. And due to carrying extra weight during pregnancy, these muscles can become really tight. So gentle exercising during pregnancy is really, really important. It keeps all those muscles and ligaments really nice and loose, so that when it comes to the birth, when our pelvis wants to open, the muscles and ligaments surrounding it are really nice and loose, and actually they allow the pelvis to do what they're trying to do. So prenatal yoga is obviously fantastic for this, because we concentrate on lots of positions that create balance as well. So we always work on both sides of the body. Things like lunges, hip openers, everything that we practice is obviously completely safe, but that is what it's designed to do. It's designed to create a balanced pelvis that is able to open when it is trying to do so during pregnancy. And another benefit of prenatal yoga is that we practice lots of birthing positions, and we practice lots of positions where you are forwards and open. And this will, the more that you practice that during pregnancy and tune into your body and get an understanding of where feels tight, what side might feel a little bit looser, by tuning into that, you're going to have that sort of intuition when you go into childbirth as to what feels good in your body, So the more you practice during pregnancy, it will become second nature, and you'll find yourself in those positions during childbirth also, which are really quite instinctive for most mothers. If they just tune into their bodies, they will instinctively get into these positions regardless. However, if you have been practicing during your pregnancy, you will already know what feels good for you and your body. And also, if prenatal yoga isn't something that you're interested in, you can just decide to take some short walks. If you were going to go drive somewhere, for instance, just choose to walk instead, because that gentle exercise again will just create balance in the pelvis and keep those muscles nice and loose. And lastly, if you have had any major accidents, even in childhood, falling off horses or any car accidents, it's really worth going to see a physio or a osteopath just to have your pelvis checked out. And you can do that early on in pregnancy. And if there are any imbalances, because the pelvis, other than being designed for childbirth, it also distributes the weight from our upper body to our lower body. So if you've had any accidents in anywhere else in your body, there's a very good chance that it will have affected your pelvis. So if you think that perhaps you've had an incident during your life that could potentially have an impact on the pelvis, then it's a really good idea to go and get that checked out. Okay, so movement during birth. Now this is absolutely vital. There is so much research and statistics and evidence to show that women who are upright and moving around during their labours have a much shorter labour. There's also evidence to show that it's an effective way of managing the powerful sensations that you're feeling as well. So it really is vital, especially in the first stages of labour, the dilation stage. It's really important to be up, moving around. You will see women instinctively tend to go into these sort of swaying the hips, circling the hips. These are all instinctive movements that most women will do anyway if they're tuning in, and they're quite hypnotic. So if you're using the breath as well, they can be quite hypnotic to get through the sensations. But also when you think about it, the baby's trying to make its way out through the pelvis, and they will make many twists and turns to navigate. It could just be a centimetre here, a centimetre there, but they will, as they descend through, they do twist and turn. And if you are moving and allowing each side of the pelvis you might just be giving the baby that tiny little bit of wriggle room that they need to tuck their chin and move down or move their hands out of the way. So it is so beneficial for both you and the baby, and it's really important when you are moving that you're just listening to your body, just tune in and do whatever feels good, because whatever's feeling good and more comfortable for you is most certainly what is going to be what your baby needs. So avoid lying down as much as possible. If it does feel good to lie down, then obviously you listen to your own body, but the majority of women will be more comfortable and find it more beneficial to be upright and moving around. It's also really powerful to know that the way you change position during birth, particularly in the second, later stages as well, when you're in the pushing stage, that changing position can actually give your baby the chance it needs to be born. So if you're finding that the baby's not coming, and midwives will be fantastic in supporting this, but it's also good to know yourself, because we don't want to always rely on having a midwife tell us what position to get into. It's all about what feels good for you. You're the one with the baby in your pelvis. You have grown your baby to fit in your pelvis, and you are going to know what position feels best for you and your baby to be born. So if you are if the birth is going along and the words that are really unfavourable, but we hear it all the time, is failure to progress, which means we're either not dilating quick enough to the hospital trust standards. It simply means that you might need to change position. Many midwives will be fantastic in supporting this, because it could be the case that you change position, you create more space in the pelvis, you give it half an hour and the baby's born. So the power of the position and changing the space within this pelvis is incredible. And it could be the difference between, you know, if you hear those words, failure to progress, well, how about I just give myself another half an hour to an hour, baby's not in distress, change position, baby comes, baby's born. Or it's the difference between, you know, failing to progress, which then instills fear. It makes us feel like, oh, we're not doing something properly, we're no good, it's all my fears have come true, I can't cope and I can't do this, which then unfortunately leads to interventions and potentially cesareans. So changing position, cannot stress enough how amazing it is. So keep moving until you find what feels good for you. And yeah. Okay, so we understand that the pelvis is structured to open and to aid childbirth, and we know that we can allow it to open by keep moving, position of the legs, positions of the knees, practicing birthing positions during pregnancy, keeping the muscles and the ligaments nice and loose during pregnancy so that all this is able to move during childbirth. Now let's talk about gravity, because gravity is going to be your number one best friend. So during pregnancy, we have a position which we call optimal fetal position for birth. And that means that the baby will get into that position hopefully by the last few weeks of pregnancy. Their head will be engaged in the pelvis, which is the heaviest part, and their spine will be running along mum's tummy, bottom will be up here, and the feet and the hands and the legs will be tucked in. And that means that when it comes to birth, there's a way that they maneuver out and they twist and turn out of the pelvis, but in that position, they have less of a distance to actually travel to descend and come out of the pelvis. So if they are back to back, which means that the baby's head, the baby's spine will be running along mum's spine here, that means that in order to get into that optimal birthing position, they now have further to turn around in order to come out. Most babies will do that. It just means that potentially the mum will feel the sensations a lot more in the back. They may be more intense, labour might be slightly longer and a little bit more strenuous, but it's not always the case. But it just is really good to know during pregnancy that if we can encourage baby to fall into that optimal birthing position, they're already in a good spot when it comes to childbirth because they have less distance to travel. So gravity is going to be your best friend. So this is the front of the pelvis. If I turn it to one side, now what tends to happen, and a lot of us have lives now where we are seated for a long amount of time due to work, commuting, just sitting on the sofa. So what tends to happen is the pelvis will tilt backwards like this. Now the baby's head and the baby's spine are the heaviest part, and they will naturally fall to the lowest part of the mother's pelvis, which if they're sitting down is going to be like this. So now we have the baby being encouraged to be in a back-to-back position. Now that's not always going to be the case, but we are seeing a rise in back-to-back babies, and it is thought that it is because we are sitting down more and we are less active. So during pregnancy, we concentrate on this a lot in prenatal yoga, because what we want to do is bring the pelvis forwards and in an upright position. And what that then does is it encourages the baby's head and the spine to now fall towards the front. So the spine will be running along mum's tummy and the baby will be in that optimal birth position. By keeping active during pregnancy, we'll encourage this. But if you are seated for a long amount of time, it's really beneficial to prop yourself up on a pillow. So just have a pillow just at the sort of on your sitting bones, just behind your bottom, just so that your pelvis is now tilted forwards, and that will encourage baby into that optimal fetal position. And again, prenatal yoga is obviously a really fantastic regular practice to have, because this is something we do focus on quite a lot with all our positions on all fours. We do really focus on having the pelvis tilted in that forwards and open position. Okay, so let's talk about gravity during the actual birth. Now, we'll come on to talk about the cervix, but the cervix is what dilates to allow the baby to descend out through the vagina. Now, the baby, again, the head is the heaviest part. So if we have the baby's head sitting directly on the cervix, each contraction that is trying to open the cervix is going to be aided by the weight of the baby's head. So the weight of the baby's head is actually going to help that cervix open. So in those early stages, the dilation stage, if you are up and you're moving around and you're staying upright, gravity is working with your body to use the weight of the baby on the cervix to actually aid dilation, to make that a faster process. So it's really important and a really good way to work with your body instead of against it. And now, obviously, we know that the pelvis is designed to open, and we don't want to restrict it in any way, so that we can have the maximum amount of space for our baby to come through. So if we think about a lady lying on her back during childbirth, which figures are roughly around 80%, or last time I looked it was 82% of women birth on their backs. Probably the worst position that you could actually be in to give birth, and I'm going to show you why. So here we know that this coccyx is designed to move out of the way, and that will give baby up to 30% more room to descend out of the pelvis cavity. Now, if the woman is lying on her back, this is what happens. So the baby's travelling down, descending through, gets to the tailbone, gets to the coccyx. Woman is lying on her back, and this cannot move out of the way. It's completely stuck. So now we have less space, and not only that, now the baby has to work against gravity to actually work its way up this coccyx in order to be born. So it's really important that we allow that to happen, because again, we're just making things harder for ourselves if that is not the case. So when you see on TV, lady lying on her back, feet in forceps, being screamed at to push, it's so much more effort for her to push the baby up this bone that will not move out of the way, instead of just being upright. So with gravity, we're going to, in an upright position, so women will more than likely instinctively in the last stages of labour be on all fours or over the birthing pool, and have the opening, to have the room for this to actually move out of the way. And so the baby's coming down with gravity, and this will push back, giving much more space for the baby to be born. So I hope you enjoyed that information about the pelvis. I think it's truly remarkable, and as you can see, there's no flaws in nature. We are perfectly designed to birth our baby, and hopefully that knowledge helps you gain a little bit of trust. And also it's quite empowering to understand that, you know, when there are times, of course, when childbirth, it can feel a little bit out of our hands and like we can't control it, but actually there is a lot that we can do to try and help the natural physiological process of birth along. And in the times where the NHS and the medical interventions are required, we're so lucky to have the medical advances that we do today. But really, there is such an amazing wisdom in the female body and anatomy when it comes to growing and birthing our babies, and the pelvis is just one example of how remarkable we really are.